I want to welcome everyone to our workshop today, Essentials for Evaluation Entrepreneurship with Dr. Nina Sabarre. Today's event is sponsored by American University's Measurement and Evaluation Program. At American University, we are committed to pursuing inclusive excellence. One of our practices shared from our Indigenous and Native communities is to offer a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our meetings and events. The goal is to build our mindfulness of the historical processes in which we all participate. American University is founded on the unceded land of the Nacotchtank and Anacostia and Piscataway peoples. I ask you to join me in acknowledging these communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. American University also acknowledges that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this institution is located. With this acknowledgement, we commit to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Those of you who attend our events regularly know that we always provide a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our events. Today, I would ask you to take that a step further. If you do not know upon whose lands you are sitting, I would recommend that you visit the National Land Digital site to identify the lands, or you can text your city, state, or province to the code for Anchorage at the number that's in the chat. You'll receive a response identifying upon whose lands you are sitting or occupying. Welcome again, and thank you for joining our workshop. Our speaker today is Nina Sabarre. Nina is the founder and principal of Intention to Impact, a research, evaluation, and strategy consulting firm that helps purpose-driven organizations measure and maximize their impact. Before Nina gets started today, it would be helpful to know where everyone is joining us from. So if you can put in the chat where you're coming from, I will go ahead and read it, and then we will pass it on over to Nina. Springfield, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Germantown, Maryland, Sacramento. I used to live in Sacramento. I'm from Jackson. Detroit, Michigan, Columbia, South Carolina, Brooklyn, New York. So we've got people from all over the country, Nina, joining us today. Manhattan, Kansas. Woohoo! Thanks very much, Nina. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bev. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here today. I'll go ahead and share my screen and jump right in. Well, as Bev mentioned, my name is Nina Sabarre, and I'm the founder and CEO of Intention to Impact. I'm so excited to be here to share some of my research, tips, and experiences related to evaluation entrepreneurship, which I like to call EVALpreneurship. Here's a quick rundown of what we'll be covering today. I'll introduce more about myself and how I got here. We'll talk about what EVALpreneurship is and what it's not. We'll look at the supply and demand dynamics. So I'll share some research on the key components of entrepreneurship and some considerations from evaluation commissioners on the demand side. I'll also end this presentation with some tips on how to approach your business strategy through an evaluation lens. And hopefully we'll have time for some questions and answers. If not, I'm always available to chat offline. You can feel free to shoot me an email. So first off, just a little bit more about myself. Again, my name is Nina, and I'm the founder and CEO of Intention to Impact, also known as I2I. I live right outside DC in Arlington, Virginia, with my husband and our sweet Portuguese water dog named Barry, named after Barack Obama, who also has Portuguese water dogs. I got my bachelor's and master's degrees in political science from Virginia Tech, go Hokies. And in 2012, I started my career in international survey research. I got to travel a bunch and work on international development programs. And in 2016, I left my full-time job to pursue my PhD in evaluation and applied research at Claremont Graduate University out in Southern California, which is also where I started independent consulting to get me through grad school. And what started as a side hustle quickly turned into my calling. And in 2018, I formally started my company. This is actually a picture of me at DC Startup Week 4 years ago, the same month that I started I2I. And I'm also an adjunct faculty member at American University, which is also where I received my first formal training in evaluation in the certificate program. And after 5.5 long years, last year, I finally completed my PhD, and my dissertation was on the role of entrepreneurship in the evaluation marketplace, which brings me to why we are all here today. So when I was first thinking about my dissertation topic back in 2018, I was simultaneously learning about how to position and scale intention to impact. That's when I realized that I don't know anything about business. My formal training and past experience was in the art and science of evaluation and applied research. So I knew how to do the work, but not at all how to sell it. So, like any good graduate student, I turned to the literature and I found very little. The scholarship and training supporting evaluation practitioners focuses primarily on how to conduct evaluation studies with little to no consideration of the business practices that enable the production and exchange of services. What I did find is that there is a pressing need to better understand the evaluation marketplace. In fact, in 2018, there was a volume in the peer-reviewed journal, New Directions for Evaluation, that was dedicated to exploring the evaluation marketplace. Authors such as Nielsen, Lemire, and Christie, among others, discussed evaluation as a growing commercial industry in the knowledge economy. And although it's rooted in social science research, evaluation practice operates within a broader market context of supply and demand. So my dissertation research contributes to the nascent knowledge base about the evaluation marketplace by specifically focusing on the role that entrepreneurship plays in influencing supply and demand. And because this was for academic research, to fully explore the intersection of evaluation and entrepreneurship, I first needed to define it. So I dove into the literature and integrated multiple definitions of both concepts to come up with the following. Evaluation entrepreneurship is the capacity and willingness to develop, manage, and assume the risk of a business that sells products and services related to the process of systematic inquiry to determine the merit, value, and worth of something. So that's a mouthful, but in fewer words, evaluation entrepreneurship is the ownership of a business that sells evaluation products and services. And what's most important about this formal definition is the capacity and willingness. Entrepreneurship does not require the same capacity as evaluation. Therefore, it takes a different kind of willingness to learn and assume this risk. So just because you're a great evaluator does not mean that you know how to scale a business. However, just like evaluation skills, entrepreneurial skills can be learned and developed over time. And also like evaluation, there is no right way to approach business. There's no playbook telling you what to do. And trust me, I've looked. I even wrote a dissertation on it. And speaking of which, I'm now going to share some select findings from that research. So this can be a little contentious, but my dissertation makes the case that there is a meaningful distinction between independent consultants and entrepreneurs. For example, in terms of commitment, consultants are committed to clients on a contract-to-contract basis, while entrepreneurs are committed to the longevity of their company. When it comes to payment, consultants charge fees for services, whereas entrepreneurs typically pay themselves a salary or owner's distribution from the overall company's revenue. Consultants often file self-employment taxes under their Social Security number, whereas entrepreneurs formally register their business as a legal entity separate from themselves. And in terms of risk, independent consultants sometimes have other jobs to mitigate the financial risk. This is really common in academia, for example, where a lot of professors also work as consultants on the side, often to give experiences to their students. whereas entrepreneurs take on the risk of managing a business as their primary source of income. And often their business might employ people or at least other consultants, which is an added financial and personal risk. So this distinction can be blurry. There are many independent consultants who consider themselves entrepreneurs and they do it full time and assume that risk. But for the sake of this research, I found that there were statistically significant differences between consultants and entrepreneurs in the way they approach and sell the work, with entrepreneurs having a substantial influence in the marketplace, which was, of course, the whole focus of the study. As part of my study, I conducted focus groups with evaluation entrepreneurs, and 5 key components of entrepreneurship emerged. These are motivation, target market, products and services, business operations, and business development. So when it comes to personal motivations to start and maintain a business, focus group participants discussed autonomy and flexibility, the desire to leave a legacy, interest in innovation and creating something new, being motivated in response to personal circumstances, for example, family situations, moving, or being let go from another job. And lastly, some were motivated by the financial stability or potential for growth. Survey responses from entrepreneurs largely reflected themes from the focus groups, with desire for autonomy and opportunity to innovate as the top motivations. Another component of entrepreneurship is having a target market. In other words, the ideal clients that a business seeks to serve. When focus group participants were asked how they identify their target market, most said that it's based on former relationships from their past work experience, alignment of values, or their issue or sector expertise. Here's a great quote from a focus group participant who shared that their target market impacts their business practices. They explain that their goal is to attract clients who are aligned with their personal values and repel those who aren't, which informs their external communications. Although personal relationships were most frequently mentioned with seasoned entrepreneurs who participated in my focus groups, it was actually ranked 4th among the broader survey sample who said that subject matter expertise and alignment with values and mission are most relevant when identifying target market. The third component relates to the core of an evaluation business, which of course is the design and delivery of evaluation products and services. So I asked focus group participants what they consider when developing their products and services. And they've most frequently mentioned their personal experience and methods preferences, their clients' needs and preferences, learning from trends in the field, and adapting to external circumstances. When survey respondents were asked which factors were most important in designing their services, they most frequently selected client needs, evaluation purpose, and budget. Interestingly, budget didn't come up with focus group conversations about products and services, as they were really focused on what was in their control. However, budgets and managing finances definitely came up when talking about business operations, which is the 4th major component. Focus group participants talked about the importance of managing finances and budgets, internal systems and processes, and hiring the right people for the right roles. These themes really emphasize how entrepreneurship requires a different set of skills than evaluation. For example, one participant talked about the inordinate amount of time they spend keeping the business afloat and funded rather than working on projects. And another talked about the amount of energy spent on policies and procedures. The last major component of entrepreneurship is business development. Focus group participants discussed the importance of referrals, branding and marketing, managing profit and quality, and long-term business strategy. Among survey respondents, the most successful business development strategies included soliciting work from past clients, responding to RFPs, thought leadership opportunities such as presentations and trainings, and soliciting referrals. In addition to collecting data on entrepreneurs, I also collected data on commissioners, who are the ultimate buyers of evaluation products and services. Focus groups and interviews with commissioners revealed three primary considerations driving their decisions: internal evaluation capacity, EVALUAND and purpose, and the source and amount of funding. First off, there were major differences in commissioning approaches depending on organizations' internal evaluation capacity, and more specifically, the individual commissioner's experience in evaluation. Nearly half of the commissioners who participated in my study were internal evaluators themselves. So they were more likely to view evaluators as thought partners, and they were more hands-on in the role and process. And they saw external firms as expanding upon their internal capacity. Just over half of the commissioners in my study were not in formal evaluation positions, and they did not have evaluation experience themselves. So they were commissioning evaluations as leaders or program staff, and they were more likely to view evaluators as external experts. And they saw their role as serving as a liaison between the evaluation teams and program contexts. And they engaged external firms to build upon their capacity rather than extend it. The next major consideration when commissioning evaluations is the EVALUAND and purpose. So EVALUAND refers to what is being evaluated, and of course, the purpose is the reason why. When it comes to EVALUAND, according to my survey of commissioners in nonprofits and foundations, nonprofit commissioners were more likely to commission program evaluations, whereas foundation commissioners were more likely to commission strategy or portfolio evaluations. Focus group participants mentioned various purposes for commissioning evaluations, including to extend or build upon evaluation capacity. Again, this is largely dependent on internal capacity. Also to inform decisions, provide an external perspective, measure outcomes or impact, and ensure accountability. Here's a quote that speaks to the value of external perspectives. This person was an internal evaluator themselves, and they said that they could shout from the mountaintops, but leadership would not listen unless it comes from an external partner. So this idea of an external evaluation firm carrying credibility and objectivity was emphasized widely among commissioners, regardless of their own evaluation experiences. Survey respondents were also asked about the purpose of their most recent evaluation, and the most common responses were to make programmatic improvements, to demonstrate impact, and to provide an independent assessment. Lastly, the third major consideration for commissioning is the source and amount of funding. My study focused on commissioners from both nonprofits and foundations, but one major difference is that nonprofits get a mix of funding from both public and private sources. According to nonprofit commissioners, public funding is typically associated with specific and less flexible requirements in commissioning, whereas private funding is known to allow for more discretion in commissioning. One commissioner described it like a fork in the road. For example, if they have public funding, they automatically need to go through an RFP process to commission evaluations. But with private funding, they have a lot more flexibility. So their approach to commissioning really just depends. When it comes to the actual budget, commissioners described four main ways that budgets are allocated: a proportion of the program, at the discretion of funders or leaders, driven by commissioners themselves, or driven by the external evaluation partners. Here's a quote referring to when budgets are decided by funders, who specifically leaders at the top who make budget decisions for the whole organization. Here's another quote referring to budgets driven by commissioners, who think critically about what to do with the money and how. And here's a quote describing instances where commissioners do not specify a budget in the RFP, and instead they wait to see what comes in and weigh the differences. And they noted that they don't always go with the lowest cost vendor. They also noted that the small businesses that provide proposals tend to provide a huge range of budgets. And of course, the actual amount of funding is a huge consideration when commissioning. Commissioners surveyed reported a wide range of budgets ranging from less than 50,000 to more than $1 million for evaluations. Okay, that was a lot of research findings that I just threw out. And honestly, it's only about a third of the data for my dissertation. So if you are interested in more of those research-based findings on the supply and demand dynamics, and specifically more on the role of the entrepreneur in influencing those dynamics, I'm happy to share out my defense slides or the manuscript. You can also, I think you can find that online as well. But now I want to get into more tangible tips by sharing how you can approach business strategy through an evaluation lens. So I thought it'd be helpful to share these ideas within a popular framework of evaluation that many of you on this call may be familiar with. The Centers for Disease Control has a 6-step evaluation framework that is commonly referenced in evaluation courses. The first step is to engage stakeholders to understand the purpose, context, and needs of the evaluation. The next step is to describe the evaluand. So this often means articulating a theory of change or operationalizing the program into a logic model or log frame. Third, you focus the evaluation design, which involves prioritizing evaluation questions and developing a sound methodology to answer those questions. Then, of course, you collect and analyze data, justify conclusions, which often requires involving stakeholders in the process of sense making. And lastly, you facilitate use and decision making based on the data and share lessons learned. Hopefully, if you're on this webinar and thinking about starting or scaling your evaluation business, these steps are no surprise to you. Now, what they won't teach you in an MBA program is that you can actually apply the evaluation process and skills to your business. So the first step in the CDC framework is to engage stakeholders. Your business stakeholders may include mentors, peers, past or potential clients and colleagues, members of the community or sector that you are serving, family and friends in your support system, or even a challenge network. One of my favorite business thinkers, Adam Grant, who is also an organizational psychologist, emphasizes the importance of having a challenge network, which is a group of people you trust to point out your blind spots and help you overcome your weaknesses. So engaging these stakeholders means putting yourself out there to have open and honest conversations about your interests, goals, strengths, challenges, and opportunities that you face. This can also help give you direction and confidence that you need to take the leap. And when starting a business, the most important stakeholder to engage is yourself. So entrepreneurship, it really requires an incredible amount of vulnerability and self-awareness. One of my business mentors, Stephanie Evergreen, encouraged me to take the Gallup StrengthsFinders assessment to identify my top strengths in business. I learned that my top 5 strengths are woo, which is a cheesy word for enthusiasm, strategic, communication, positivity, and intellection. This assessment helped me realize that what I was lacking was execution. In the first few years of my business, I had the ideas, skills, commitment, and vision, but I couldn't really scale on my own. So 2 years into business, I finally found my business partner, Kathleen Dahl. And while I'm I2I's CEO, Kathleen is our COO. Her top strengths are achiever, harmony, discipline, focus, and developer. So she's the executor to my vision, the yin to my yang. And if it wasn't for this deep self-reflection and vulnerability, I would have never identified my gaps or how to fill them. The second step of the CDC framework is to describe the evaluand. In this case, your business. This is where you get to figure out your mission, vision, values, and company's DNA. This is a term I coined to describe the distinct, natural, and authentic way that you work and deliver services. Of course, this requires defining your target market, understanding their needs, and really thinking critically about what you have to offer and how you meet those needs. The third step of the CDC framework is to focus your design. In evaluation, this is where you design your methodology. In the case of business, this involves developing a business strategy and plans to execute. At I2I, we have a 5-year vision, annual plan, and quarterly goals that we revisit regularly. We also do biannual reviews of our main pillars of business, which include products and services, marketing, business development, finances, and operations. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, not because it's simple. In fact, it's the exact opposite. This process can take months, or in my case, years. But please do not be discouraged if you don't have a solid business plan right away. It takes a lot of trial and error to figure it out, but it's incredibly important that you keep trying to develop and implement a business strategy if you're serious about building a business that's bigger than yourself. So here are a few resources that have really helped me figure out our business strategy. First is the book Traction by Gina Wickman, which provides a framework to get a grip on your business. Second is the Changemakers Legion, which is a group coaching program and community run by Tamara Hamai, and it's specifically created for evaluation consultants. Third is the online course Boost and Bloom, run by Stephanie Evergreen, who runs a successful data visualization company and also knows the evaluation business world really well. And lastly, I would highly recommend being part of the Independent Consulting Topical Interest Group, which is part of the American Evaluation Association. The ICTIG has a lot of resources, programs, trainings, and even weekly chats related to evaluation business. And something that's been really helpful for me is being part of a mastermind group that's part of this ICTIG community. Okay, so the fourth stage of the CDC framework is to collect and analyze data. It's amazing how many evaluators do this for their clients, but not themselves. There are many different types of data that you can collect about your business. For example, some quantitative sources include budgets. You can track your actual budget versus your estimated budget. You should also be monitoring your profit and loss statements. Personally, I'm not the best at the financial aspects of the business, so we have a bookkeeper, accountant, and financial planner who all work together to help in that regard. What I'm better at tracking is my time. I use my calendar as a method for collecting data on how I spend my time, especially when it comes to tracking billable versus non-billable hours. We also have feedback mechanisms to collect data on our performance. At the end of every project, we administer client and collaborator surveys that help us identify areas for improvement and assess what worked really well and whether or not we're living up to our values. When it comes to qualitative data, we have regular reflection meetings to debrief on projects. And personally, I love journaling all the highs and lows of business, and more importantly, reading those journals to learn from those experiences. We also work with an operations coach who has helped us with the process of documenting as we do, which we call DAD. And documentation helps us identify repeatable processes in our work, develop standard operating procedures, and cultivate institutional knowledge, which will be critical as we grow. The next step in the CDC framework is to justify conclusions. So this is after you've collected and analyzed your business data. You then need to reserve the time and space for reflection. This can be hard to do, especially when you're so busy working on projects for clients. It's hard to find time to work on the business when you are working in the business. It's also important to revisit your business plan and quarterly goals. And this process might involve your stakeholders in assessing the health of your business and directions for the future. The final step in the CDC framework is to ensure use and share lessons learned. When it comes to use, you can leverage your operations data to systematize your business. For example, create templates, instate recurring meetings, and implement the repeatable processes that you defined from documentation. And actually using your business data will ensure that you're in alignment with your mission, vision, and values. It can also help you validate or refine your company DNA, and you can use your data to help set new goals. It's also important to remember that your business can and should evolve as you do, and it's not always about scale or growth. Your criteria for success in business is personal to you, and it can be different in different seasons of your life. For example, if you're early in your career, your definitions of success might look different than if you've been in the workforce for several decades and your business is your segue into retirement, for example. For some people, revenue might be their measure of success, but for others, it might be the flexibility of entrepreneurship or the opportunity to innovate or work on issues that you care deeply about. It could be all of those things, none of those things, some of those things. But the point is that business success looks different for everyone. And by applying evaluative thinking, you can design and operationalize your business in a way that's right for you. Lastly, when it comes to sharing lessons, give back to the evaluation business community. Join the ICTIG, contribute AEA 365 articles, write blog posts, give presentations, just like I'm doing right now, about what you're learning. Not only is it good karma, but it's good for the field. After studying the evaluation marketplace, I feel strongly that evalpreneurs have power, privilege, and responsibility to shape the quality and value of our services, which influences the extent to which evaluation is used to advance equity and achieve positive social change in the world. So it's incredibly important for us to be reflective practitioners and share these lessons with the field. It's also really important because there are so many business books, podcasts, and resources out there that are just not applicable to what we do. And while it's really useful to learn from all of that business content, we have the opportunity to reimagine business norms and practices in a way that centers our values and reflects the same kind of impact that we seek from our evaluation practice. So I firmly believe that when we operate our businesses from a place of abundance and collaboration, we can uplift the whole field, including disrupting the status quo to make the field more inclusive and equitable. And in that spirit, that was about half an hour. So I will welcome you all to ask me anything for the rest of this hour. I'm happy to go back to any slides or share out more of the research, or just answer questions about my personal experiences.
There are two questions in the chat. One, if you will make the slides available, and then the other relating your experience to that if you are an international student.
I'm not an international student. I'm born and raised here in Virginia.
Oh, no, I don't think he's asking that. I think he is an international student.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
Oh, yeah. And wondering how like his path might be a little bit different as an international student.
Great question. There is a lot of independent consulting in the international development space. Specifically, what comes to mind, there's a listserv. I'll find the link and send it out. But I think it's called Parangri. I can never pronounce it, but it's about international development consulting. And so I would pay attention to that listserv. But these days, because work can be done remotely, really, I think it's not a barrier to be an international student that's doing independent consulting. It might be a barrier if you're looking to work on subcontracts that require specific citizenship, but honestly, I don't think, in general, I don't think it's a huge barrier. Any other questions?
I have a question that was sent directly to me. Well, the first question was on the slides. Are you going to make the slides available?
Yes, happy to do that.
And I'll just read this other question. As a new evaluator whose ultimate goal is evaluation entrepreneurship, how will I know when I'm ready to branch out on my own?
Great question. I think for me, before I branched out on my own, I started by independent consulting and subcontracting for others, and I would highly recommend doing that. It is important that before you jump into evaluation entrepreneurship, because of all the reasons I explained, the business skills are quite different, that you do have the evaluation experience and skills already. So then you can start to focus on the business aspect. And so what I did while I was in grad school, I started working as a freelance independent evaluation and research consultant. And so my target market in that stage was actually small businesses like I2I, for example. And so I would network and try to find small businesses who had the contracts and direct relationships with clients, but did not necessarily have the capacity to fulfill all the work themselves. And through that, I was able to work on a really wide variety of projects and across many sectors, and gain a lot of important skills. I also got the chance to work on projects, some from beginning to end, some just on report writing or just on data collection. And so it was a really great way to get a lot of diverse experience very quickly. And then another unintended consequence of that experience was I was also able to see up close and personal how other small businesses operated. And that definitely informed a lot of my thinking and interest in small business. And when I was ready to go off on my own, I could then take what I appreciated from those experiences and change what I didn't necessarily like about them.
Nina, you've got 3 questions in the chat. Do you want me to read them out?
I can see them. I see
Starting with Michelle.
Hi, Michelle. Good to see you here. You asked about my experience with RFPs versus what my research found. Great question. Yeah, it was surprising to me, right, that the research found RFPs to be such a successful solution in the survey, because usually with RFPs, and maybe this is why the survey had such a positive response rate, oftentimes RFPs are circulated with select groups before they're made public. And so perhaps people who find success with the RFP process are already part of the short lists of evaluators. And I know in my experience, that's when they've been most successful. So there have been situations where we've received an RFP, responded to a proposal, and gone through the whole interview process. But more often, it's after someone has already sent them to us directly. So either I already have a relationship there, or there was another referral by a colleague. So I do think submitting a proposal blindly to an RFP where you don't have any connections is harder. That being said, it's not impossible. My first big contract was doing just that. And I think part of my strategy for developing a proposal blindly and submitting to an RFP without knowing anyone is putting together the right team. So I did a lot of research on what they needed and went out to my network. I was all over LinkedIn and found the right independent consultants to put together the team, and even did so much as look around LinkedIn to see if independent consultants had connections to that firm, recognizing if I didn't have a personal connection, maybe someone else would. And in those cases, we've seen more success. I see another question. I find it hard to do justice in my role as an evaluator and to do it within the budget and time. Often left with an evaluation that I'm not fully satisfied with, but didn't have the budget to do more. How do you tackle that as a business? It's the biggest reason stopping from taking the leap. That's such a great question. Oh, and it's a hard one. What we do, so I kind of have a long-winded answer on this. In the beginning of my practice, I used to develop budgets by thinking about the amount of time. So In other words, I had an hourly rate and a daily rate, and I would simply put together a budget by thinking, how long do I think this will take times my rate? And that was the budget. And that was that. After being burned many times for the exact reasons that you described in your question, I started approaching budgets differently. And now when I think about level of effort, I no longer equate time to effort. I've started to recognize that effort is a lot more complicated than just time alone. Effort is a combination, is a confluence of different things, such as, of course, the amount of time, your level of skill set, the complexity of the project or the context or the method, the uncertainty, whether or not you've worked with this client before or if they're a brand new client, which always takes more time. There's so many different factors that are part of effort. And oftentimes in a budget, they'll ask you to justify your budget against level of effort. And so what I started doing was I created a level of effort calculator that's internal to our firm. And it takes into account all of these different variables. So instead of just thinking 1 hour equals this amount of money, I think about all of those different factors and come up with a weighted level of effort score, which then I multiply against the amount of time expected. And that gives me a better picture, a more expansive view, and more realistic picture of what this budget should be. And I use that and I explain it to clients too if they have questions about the budget. And it really helps. I think now it creates it's just a more of an abundance mindset, more of a spacious budget where you can really take the time needed to deal with complexity. Of course, it's not always possible to go that route because in many cases the budget ceilings are outside of your control. In those cases, I really try hard. I push the client through several conversations to give me at least a budget range. There's nothing more frustrating than writing a proposal and not having any clue what the budget range is. But I always tell the clients that if I can at least get an idea of what we're working with, we can design the evaluation to fit those needs. And so I'm really careful about designing to the range while recognizing that quality, rigor, and utility are most important in the work. So I think clearly about what is the budget range, what's the level of effort, and how can I right size the evaluation project so we're not sacrificing quality within this range. And so it's definitely complicated. It's more of an art than a science, and it takes a lot of practice and time to get good at and to build the confidence to budget in that kind of way. So hopefully that's helpful.
I do have a couple of other questions that came directly to me, and then we have Shelley that's raising her hand. How did you craft your mission and vision, defining your unique services like business coach, partner, peer conversations?
Thanks. Yeah, that took a long time. Like I mentioned earlier, this process for me, it's easy now in retrospect to present it to you. These are all the steps. But the truth is, it took me years to figure some of those things out. And it's not that I was kind of twiddling my thumbs and just like brainstorming mission, vision, values the whole time. I was out there. I was working on contracts. I was staying busy. I was honing my craft. And all along the way, I was paying attention to what's the through line here? What are the projects that light me up? What am I finding is my go-to approach to the work, and how can I replicate that across project context? So it was a lot of doing the work, paying attention, reflective practice, collecting the data, approaching the work as an evaluator, and I had a lot of help. I think there's this misnomer that independent consulting and entrepreneurship, you have to go at it alone, and there's this kind of sexy idea of independence. But the truth is, it really takes a village. I worked personally with a life coach for 4 years, and I did that because so much of entrepreneurship takes knowing yourself and being vulnerable, knowing your strengths, and really leaning into yourself and leaning in with what I call confident humility, because there's so much about the work that I don't know, but being confident in what I do know helps with that and helps with the imposter syndrome in being a young entrepreneur, young female person of color entrepreneur. Lots of things that were kind of working against me that I had to work through life coaching. Some might turn to therapy for something like that, but working on yourself is really important during the early stages. Also, I mentioned earlier the Change Makers Legion. I was part of that group for 2 years, and through that group, we had actual like coaching and worksheets and templates to help us think through mission, vision, values. And I'll have to say it evolved a lot over the years, especially as I gained more experience and figured out like what I wanted to do and not just doing everything that I had to do. That's another thing. In the early stages, I said yes to everything because I didn't really know what my niche was. And I don't regret it because I learned a lot along the way and it helped me identify the niche. So much of this just takes time and determination and patience and so much grace that you don't have to have it all figured out at once. I've also gone through an accelerator program. I forgot to mention this one. It's called Disruptive CEO, and it's specifically for female founders. And what I liked about that program is it wasn't specific to evaluation. And I actually gained a lot hearing from female founders across different industries. I'm happy to kind of share all of these resources when I share out the slides. I'll do that. I'll coordinate that with Bev. So that was another business accelerator. So I've gone through a lot of professional development when it comes to working on myself, working on my business, and realizing the two go hand in hand. And then, of course, lots of podcasts, lots of experimentation. Bringing in Kathleen was a game changer for me because having someone else to bounce ideas off of really helped a lot. So hopefully there's something in there helped answer that question.
And one other quick question in the chat that was to me, thank you for your presentation. How did you find the small businesses you worked with during your independent consulting?
So I was really lucky that my first client, my first small business was my former employer. So what happened was I was working full time for an international research company. And when I decided to leave my job and pursue my PhD and become a full-time graduate student, I quit my job. And then my company was so supportive of me getting my PhD, and they reached out and asked if I was open to independent external consulting. And at the time, consulting was not on my radar. I really didn't understand how this was different. I thought, okay, I was working full time, now I'm working part time. But because I was moving to California, my former employer was very clear, I am not a part-time employee, I am independent. And, for tax reasons, moving to California, they wanted that to be very clear to me. And actually, I really appreciated that delineation because I realized with the independence came the flexibility. And so what I did was I was independent consulting for my former company and realized I could do it for others. So I started mostly networking with an AEA and just meeting people and letting people know that I'm out in the market as a freelance independent consultant. I started being really active in the ICTIG, where there's often opportunities for people to work together. And I just started paying attention to job postings that were looking for part-time consultants. A lot of this work happens with part-time consultants, even I2I. We have a small team, core team, and we have about a dozen independent consultants that we tap into projects. So we're constantly looking to build our bench. So I just started to look around for other boutique consulting firms that operate like that. And a lot of it happened through word of mouth. But I think if you are currently in a position where you're thinking about leaving your full-time job to go out on your own, it might be worth exploring if there's an opportunity to leverage that relationship with your company into a more part-time independent gig. And it doesn't work for everyone. It has to be kind of a lucky situation, but it's worth exploring that.
And next we have a question from Shelley.
Hi, Nina. First of all, thank you so much. This was a wealth of information. My question has to do with your transition, well, you're earning your PhD in the process. And I just wanted to get your feedback on how that changed, I guess, your trajectory, and if you feel that a PhD is required to really excel in this field.
Thanks. Great question, Shelley. So I don't think that a PhD is required to excel in this field. There's a lot of master's programs out there. Of course, American University has a great program, and there's certificate programs. There's a lot of trainings. So my university, Claremont Graduate University, offers summer workshops. There's the Evaluators Institute. AEA has a lot of workshops. There's a lot of ways to hone your evaluation skills without pursuing a PhD. So it's definitely not a requirement. And warning, I mean, a PhD is a huge time commitment. I did have to take out loans for it. I moved across the country. It depends on your stage of life. It's not for everyone. But I will say for me, it was a game changer and a catalyst in my career. Specifically, I did it kind of early enough on in my career where it occurred to me if I wanted to pursue monitoring and evaluation, I could either keep learning on the job and go job to job, and I wasn't really getting enough of it. In my job, I was doing a lot of survey research, but not enough evaluation. And so I thought maybe I can just change jobs, move more laterally. But just where I was in my career, I figured I wanted to learn more, become an expert, and contribute to the field. So that was part of my choice to pursue the PhD. But the other thing was, once I realized that I was interested in the intersection of evaluation and entrepreneurship, what really helped me finish the program and has really helped me in my business was merging the two. So my business informed my research, and my research very much informed my business. As you can see in some of my dissertation findings that I shared today, my whole research objective was to help with my entrepreneurial journey. And so I think if you do choose to take the leap into a PhD program, knowing your career goals and doing whatever you can to merge the two so that they work in a complementary fashion is really important, because I've seen some peers who have research interests in the PhD program that differ from their career goals or their day-to-day work. And it just makes it a lot harder to get it done. And so, yeah, so if you are to do it, integrating the two as much as possible would be my advice.
And would take you back to your project monitoring and evaluation PME 600 phase. One of the questions we ask in that class is, what is your evaluator identity? And figuring out that aspect is a really important part of everybody's evaluation journey. We have a question from David in the chat. At this point in your career, what types of programs do you seek to evaluate? What types of work do you avoid and why? And how do you and your partner resolve what programs you will work on?
Such great questions. Thanks, David. So at this point in my career, the programs that I seek to evaluate, we love working with foundations, and we primarily work with foundations. So in philanthropy, we help foundations use evaluation to measure the impact of their grant making as a whole. So that's a lot of portfolio evaluations instead of program evaluations. We do very few program evaluations these days. And rather, we look across a whole portfolio of grantees, what's the overall impact? And that often requires working with foundations to develop what we call MEL frameworks, monitoring, evaluation, and learning frameworks for their portfolios. So we love that kind of work. It occurs at a little bit more of a systems level, more big picture. It's a lot more related to strategic planning. And so we find that really interesting. My business partner, Kathleen, her dissertation was on strategic planning and evaluation. So we leverage that quite a bit. We both leverage our dissertations a lot in our work, which is great. So that's what we're doing these days. What types of work do you avoid? Great question. Actually, this is a fun one to answer. Just 2 weeks ago, we walked away from a contract because the client was unwilling to center equity in the work. And I should say it's not that they were against it. They weren't on, it's just that it wasn't a focus for them. But for us, it was so clearly integrated into what they were trying to achieve. And by not measuring equity, we felt it was kind of a disservice to the program. And we explained that to them and they understood, but they felt like, oh, it's not really part of the budget. It's not really the point. Right now, we just need to attract more funding, which is totally fair. That is a real reason for evaluation, but we just weren't interested in working with a client that felt misaligned in our values. So I definitely try to avoid that kind of work. I try to avoid working with clients who aren't ready to ask hard questions and aren't really looking for strategic learning and to test their assumptions. We're not that interested in working with clients that are just doing this to check a box, and there's a lot of that work out there. But that being said, earlier on, I definitely worked on some projects that were more about checking boxes just to get the experience. And sometimes it's not about the program or the context, it's just about honing the skills and even like learning how to be a consultant, communication, soft skills. There's a lot of reasons to take on work that doesn't really light you up. And over time, you can start to be choosier. And the last part of this question, how do you and your partner resolve programs that you will work on? Yeah, so we've started to collect data on this actually, on all the opportunities that we go for all the pitches that we do, all the actual projects that work out. We've started collecting data on the whole business development process, including our criteria for our interests, alignment in our values, the work that excites us. And we're kind of just in the process now of using that criteria moving forward as decision-making tool. So we really take seriously the whole idea of approaching the business through an evaluation lens. So we have all sorts of criteria and different types of data collection to help us make decisions for our work.
Any final questions or final thoughts, Nina, before we wrap up?
No, thank you all for tuning in. I hope it was helpful. I know it was a lot that we covered, so definitely happy to follow up with a couple links and the slides. If you're interested, I think you can find my dissertation on the CGU website or some kind of wherever they keep dissertations on the internet. So thank you all so much for these great questions.
Thank you very much for leading the workshop today. We really appreciate the time you spent with us and for helping us better understand evaluation entrepreneurship.
My pleasure.
Our next New Time Eastern workshop is Thursday, October 13th on using most significant change to measure impact with Odile David. You can check my LinkedIn account in the coming days for an invite to that webinar. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and Nina for hosting the webinar today.
Thanks, everyone.